Hey guys, welcome to the 1% Better Pod. Here we talk about how to become better in all aspects of life, professional, personal, and everything in between. I interview top performers in various industries and we distill their processes for success into actionable advice for you all to use. Be sure to leave a review and follow the pod to never miss an episode. Also, check out our episodes on YouTube for a better viewing experience. With that, let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the 1% Better podcast. I'm joined today by Alex Noonan, one of my colleagues at Forbes who's become a friend, and I'll turn it over to him to give a quick intro and we'll get started.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So like Matt said, I also work at Forbes, specifically within like an e-commerce division, mainly specialize in SEO and content strategy. Aside from the stuff I do at work, I run a lot of informational blogs and websites to kind of keep SEO skills sharp. And as we'll get into, there's a lot of things I'm trying to do to kind of innovate on the websites and
Cool. So we'll start off with SEO. How did you first get involved? What drew you to it? And what keeps you interested in the space?
Sure. So in high school, I had a YouTube channel or two YouTube channels that were both gaming. And pretty much from like 2012 until like 2015, I kept those channels pretty active and grew them pretty well. But I would just upload kind of miscellaneous content that was like very specific to the games that I was playing and had real no sense of SEO, of any type of like content strategy. And so once I graduated high school and I got to college, I kept those YouTube channels going, but it was only then I start to learn a little bit about SEO, not only in websites, but in YouTube videos as well. And so I kind of learned a few strategies, 2016, 2017 that I utilized in those YouTube channels. And that was essentially like my first little introduction there. But prior to that, I had worked on things that could have really benefited from SEO, the channels in those previous years, but never really did it. And again, like I said, was only introduced to it in like 2016 and 2017.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned this in your intro. So obviously like by trade, you do SEO professionally, but you also have done it for personal projects and some side sites. Are there any learnings you think that, and I know obviously there is a difference between like working for a large media publisher versus a more niche site, but what are some learnings from your professional career that you think you can give to people running niche sites or people who are just getting started in SEO, maybe some main takeaways that they could benefit from?
Yeah, sure. So I think just to answer the first part of the question, the main difference is that I've noticed working for a pretty big organization and publishing content versus just starting a website or having a very small website. The main thing I definitely think has to do with like authority. At least in the area that I specifically work in, we're able to compete for significantly more competitive terms than something like one of the smaller websites, one of the starter websites that I have. And I think the strategy definitely, because of that, the strategy is definitely different between those two. And we definitely focus more on, we have a very good sense that we'll rank for a lot of terms at Forbes that we'll write for. And so the question isn't necessarily, will we rank for this? The question is like, what terms should we write for that say have the most volume or have the highest AOV that we know we'll rank for, that will give us, the quickest turnaround in commissions. Or so in that sense, we strategize the content much differently because it has to do more so with how can we benefit from this if we already know we're going to rank. And obviously for smaller and starter sites, a lot of the questions and the strategy more so revolves around, will I even rank for this? The priority for the content you come out with on a starter site is trying to go after like no competition or low competition keywords so that you can just start to gain a little bit of authority and start to get a little bit of traffic rather than, writing content that's incredibly competitive that you'll likely never rank for on a starter site. So I think that's definitely the main difference is authority and then how you base your strategy around that.
Right. And just for anyone listening who's not sure exactly what he's talking about, authority is referring to is how well liked your site is by Google in terms of authority over a certain topic. Obviously, like a large media publisher, your authority to Google is going to be a lot higher than if you're a brand new site that Google's never seen before. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to rank for certain terms. No, I like that distinction. And then I guess, so having, experience in both of those areas, what are some things that you've learned that works really well, or some advice that you have for people running niche sites or people trying to get into SEO, not working for large websites?
Yeah. So I think, so mainly, I guess, a piece of advice. So now, I guess, I have around 10 websites that I run. All of them have been started from scratch, and for all of them, I've pretty much taken the same approach when writing, say, the first 100 articles or 200 articles. And I think it's taking time. I think the main thing, the main tip I think a lot of people starting sites should have is really try to understand search intent. I think, especially now that Google's become much more, Google has become much better at understanding what users are looking for in terms of like if you search something up, rather than relying on certain like old SEO metrics like keyword density or different things like, yeah, how frequently is the keyword featured in this and that, and Google trying to figure out what the best results are based on those metrics. Google has gotten really good at figuring out what people are looking for and if your piece of content matches what they're looking for. So I think the biggest piece of advice is for every keyword that you're looking for, try to understand what the intent is behind it. So I do a lot of informational articles. And so if I'm writing a particular topic, say, about the differences between something like Publix and ShopRite, try to understand everything that somebody might want to know about the differences between those two things, whether it be price, quality, amount of locations, etc. Try to get a really good understanding of what that is. And if you're doing keyword research and you notice that the top 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 articles don't really match that intent, there's something missing. Or in some cases for no competition keywords or very low competition keywords, there's just nothing that really hits the intent. Then you can be sure that that is something that's going to be easy to rank for if you write it correctly. I hope that like makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know you mentioned there, writing 200 articles. Have you noticed that there's a certain point of content volume that you really start to see traffic pick up? And secondly, getting to that 100 articles, have you, created a system or a way to get around it? I know maybe AI might change that now, but we'd kind of love to hear those two responses there.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good questions, actually. So to answer the first question, in terms of when there is a little bit of that like tipping point, from my experience, I'll definitely say that when you're writing the first 100 articles, it's probably going to take a good amount of time for you to even see the articles reach the light of day on Google, especially when you first start out. Like the first 2 to 3 months, you could publish something and you're likely not really going to be able to find it on Google. But then over time, as Google starts to trust your site and you start to build, as we mentioned before, authority, you're going to see them appear faster and faster on Google, as long as it's obviously high quality content that kind of hits the intent. So I definitely think after around 100 articles, I remember I started to see content that I wrote for the low competition keywords rank within like a day or two. And that seems to be pretty consistent across the board. Once I hit the 100 articles that I had like personally written, that seemed to be when Google was like, okay, clearly a few months have passed. There's still, whoever owns this website, whoever's writing is writing quality content that hits the intent. And so there's less sort of regulation, I guess, that you have to go through in order to get your content to rank. So I'll definitely say that around 100 to 150 high quality articles is when I start to see a lot more traction. And normally that takes, in my experience, when I was handwriting them or when I was writing them myself, that was over the course of like a few months. So partially it's a timing thing and partially it's an amount of content thing, but definitely I would say 100 to 150 is when you really start to see it. And that gratification that I would always feel of like that little hit of like dopamine whenever you would post something and, a day later you would see it on, in position 10 or 9 on Google is really encouraging. And that is kind of where I think where I would get hooked is like, okay, clearly this is working. I just had to wait it out. So yeah, to answer that first part of the question, I definitely think around 100 and 250 is that tipping point in terms of getting onto Google very quickly. And then the second part of that is like, you were saying like, what have I sort of done to accelerate the production in that sense, or is that
Yep.
kind of what you're looking at?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, I know we've worked closely together, so I know that you now use AI to do a bit of the content generation, but was just curious your approach to hitting that because I know that that's the area where a lot of people probably get flushed out of SEO is that 2 to 3 months where your site is in like what we refer to as like sandbox mode, where it's probably really not getting picked up by Google. But then on top of it, you're talking about putting out 100 articles. Some people struggle to even get 20. So would just kind of like to hear maybe how you systemize that to make it go a little bit faster, or your approach to really getting content at that scale.
Yeah, sure. So, and I guess to off of what you sort of mentioned too, I think I've maybe subconsciously have picked a lot of websites where it was somewhat easy to pump out a lot of content. Whereas there was a lot of different, again, especially the stuff that I know that you sort of focus in on in terms of cryptocurrency and in terms of like things like that. And it's significantly, the production time significantly slows down because they need to be so like it's not just surface level research; it's incredibly in depth research. So I think maybe that's where my experience is maybe a little bit different because I know different industries call for different amounts of research and stuff. So yeah, to that point, I think that is a little bit different. That number that of 100 articles might differ for everyone there. The one thing that I did though, so before AI and stuff, sort of like before ChatGPT became a thing, one of the websites that I ran was specifically comparing and answering questions about grocery stores. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I used that example before. And I realized that a lot of people online search for grocery store comparisons. So like Publix versus Wegmans, like what are the differences? Or like ShopRite versus Kroger, what are the differences? And so basically what I did in a Google spreadsheet was I collected all the names of the most popular grocery stores that people were searching. And then I went through the individual websites of those and I collected like pricing information. So I was able to have like this huge pricing database in a Google sheet. And then I also went to so that was kind of like when I realized people were looking for comparison articles, I was like, okay, price is definitely a main concern. So if I can figure out what the price differences are between these stores, I think I could stand a chance in terms of like writing something of like high quality. Then I also went to the FDA's website and they give you numbers of like how many recalls a particular store has had over time. And so if you could figure that stores with like less recalls are technically would be considered like higher quality stores versus stores with more product recalls, it's not fully indicative of the store's quality, but it was like the most trustworthy resource I think I had. So very quickly I had this huge database of the most popular grocery stores, their pricing and sort of their quality information. And once I had all of that there, essentially everything that you need to write a good article is in this spreadsheet. All you need to do is actually write it. So I think my tip before even using AI, I think the big tip would be to try to get like a database of all the things that you might be writing about. And again, this isn't applicable to everyone. Might be applicable to certain people writing certain types of articles. And I think it's going to make your life a lot easier because you're not necessarily going in and doing the research every single time. It's pretty much there. And then once I would do that, I would basically copy the particular store's information, paste that table into a Google Doc, and then I would just write about the information and say, ShopRite seems to have an average price of this, whereas Publix has an average price of this. And it was so easy to write about because that information was there. So I think if you can find efficiencies in whatever you're writing, whether it be doing a lot of research beforehand or whatever, I think that's super helpful. And now I guess how that kind of has turned into helping me write stuff with using AI or kind of AI sort of assisting the content creation. The main issue I think a lot of people have in the content creation space in terms of AI is that the information is false. Like if you ask ChatGPT to write something and it writes something and it's incorrect, it's the same thing with CNET. When CNET was using AI, they were coming out with certain things that weren't necessarily correct. And I think what I have realized is that if you can do original research and accurate research beforehand, so similar to that spreadsheet I was talking about with the grocery stores, you can feed ChatGPT or whatever other AI you use that information, say, hey, I have this information on these two grocery stores here. can you write the differences between the two? Or can you write me an article that talks about the similarities and differences between the two? For the most part, the AI doesn't really stray away from the data that you gave it. And if you know that the data is correct and you know that it's well researched, then you can be pretty sure that it's a well written, high quality article. So I guess my tip to people maybe interested in doing things with AI but that are a bit skeptical is to just if you can do bulk research ahead of time and you know that it's going to be good research, you can feed that to any sort of AI thing and it should come out with some pretty high quality articles. So that's a really good way to help scale content production with AI, but trusting that the content's correct.
Yeah, that's definitely a big point on the accuracy. That's probably going to be the biggest struggle over the next few years, probably for all these chatbots, is how do we get the most accurate. It's definitely good for ideation. I mean, I've used it. It's funny that AI it even gets simple math wrong when computers have been able to do that for a long time. So that's definitely an area that people can watch out for. I do have to ask, because I've heard you talk about this multiple times, this site in particular, and I'm always just blown away about the FDA thing. How did you even wind up, how did you get there to look up on FDA, the recalls? Were you specifically looking for interesting information, or how did you get to that approach in your creation?
Yeah, so maybe this is me gaming the SEO stuff a little bit, but from my experience with so that was the grocery one was the second website that I made. The prior one was a golf website, and there is a governing body of golf called the USGA, and they also have a counterpart. I think it's called the R&A, and they have a lot of information on. They have a huge database that tells you whether or not certain clubs or certain pieces of equipment are legal. They have a whole rule book that you can sort of go by, and in every golf article that I wrote, that featured a link according to the USGA or according to the RNA, and I linked to their it's usga.org. They're very authoritative, and that was the one thing that I always looked for. I noticed that those articles ranked quicker, and it's probably anecdotal, but I think that there definitely was a tie between including evidence and links to sourcing high quality websites and high quality other articles, and so I took that and I was trying to find what would the governing bodies of grocery stores be. What is there a high quality link that I can use to maybe sort of show Google that hey, this is well researched because I use this from from this high quality or this very, very authoritative organization. And so the FDA just popped into my mind. And so I started looking up certain grocery stores. I would just look up ShopRite FDA, whatever FDA. And I think at one point the FDA's product recall database popped up, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. So it was a little bit me trying to game the system because I really wanted to have a recurring authority in my articles that I would sort of source. So that's kind of how I came across it, and maybe a little bit of trying to game the SEO there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think something that SEO, and for those of you who don't know, I worked on the SEO team with Alex prior to this year, but I think one thing that SEO taught me was just the importance of data in general. I think that data just has so many answers to every industry, not just SEO or marketing, but just in general. And I think that data collection tools are getting better and more accurate. So I definitely think that that's something people can leverage more that maybe they're not leveraging as much, is that data doesn't lie for the most part. Obviously you can skew data, but it's usually a pretty great telltale of what direction you should be going to or where you should be focusing your attention. And obviously the more data you collect, the better amount of things you have to be able to make those conclusions. Would love to hear kind of your thoughts on your approach to SEO now with AI. Has it changed? Do you see the industry changing going forward? And then we'll kind of wrap up SEO and move on to YouTube after this. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so in terms of how things have changed, I don't know, maybe I haven't been in the game long enough, but I've only I started doing SEO in 2019, and since then there's a lot that's definitely changed. I think in terms of just SEO itself, as I sort of mentioned before, I think Google is significantly less reliant on these old metrics, things like keyword density other kind of weird things that people used to try to game to rank well. And Google's gotten much better again at understanding search intent. And so, there's so many levels to search intent. So, one, you want to make sure that if you're writing, if there's an informational keyword that you're writing about, and you're trying to, you're not really answering the question, you're likely not going to rank well. And on top of that, even if you do kind of target the question, but you don't answer it, say, as in depth or as this, as that, if people aren't getting what they're looking for, through a bunch of like different engagement metrics, that Google's very easily tell whether or not something hits search intent. And so I think what I've seen change the most is Google's reliance on those old metrics has significantly gone down, and they've gotten much better at understanding what the intent is and what articles are hitting the intent the most. So I think that's definitely changed, and that's kind of, in terms of what I publish, that's definitely what's become the main focus. Is like, doesn't matter, word count doesn't matter anymore, keyword density doesn't matter anymore, all these different things don't really matter as much, but I think search intent has become increasingly more important. So I think that's the thing that's probably changed the most.
Yeah. And and even anecdotally, I think that's more so the case, especially with, using the generative search experience that Google released. It seems like the results, it's now just the North Star metric of, is this exactly what the user's looking for? It has a lot less to do with what you're mentioning about all these different data points that you look at in SEO about keywords and about article rankings and load speed and all these other things. And it seems that the tech is getting better now to the point where it's, am I getting closer and closer to the exact answer this person's looking for? Yeah. Which is interesting to consider the implications across like the value stream of search now, because used to visit multiple links for one search, but the better it gets, you might only visit one. And that's going to impact traffic. It's going to impact ad revenue. So I'm curious to see how that kind of plays out, or if Google takes a different approach. And maybe, I know I read a while ago, Google has a patent for a type of algorithm for search that, instead of displaying, like when you Google something, for the most part, the top 5-10 results are probably all have very similar content structure and answers, but they have a patent to basically create the loading page for the searches would be like as different answers as possible. So instead of it being like, if you have your top article that answers the question one way, the next 8 or 9 are all going to be different from that article, instead of them all being almost identical. It's not released yet. It may never get released, but it is interesting to think about how search engines might change, especially with that search results page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, so with that too, because I guess and I think basically my understanding of what you're saying is like, as Google gets really good at understanding search intent, there might be a point in time where they are very certain that this top article they provide you is likely going to answer everything. So because they can be so confident that this one answers it, let's give you a bunch of other things that might answer a different thing. Like, yeah, I totally agree with you there, because I definitely think there's going to be a point, and maybe we're already at that point, or we're very close to that point, where Google has like a degree of confidence in terms of how well they think a certain thing fits a search intent.
Yeah, because I guess the other way we can think about, giving different results is, to your point, if it knows that you typed in an informational keyword, something like, how do I start a YouTube channel? And it knows that first article is going to answer that question. Maybe instead of the next one being informational, it's like moving you down, the keyword funnel. Like it's something more commercial or transactional, because it knows that now that you have this information, you're most likely to maybe buy a YouTube course or buy like an editing pack for Adobe Effects. So those could be different ways that Google can maybe keep you in the search engine, because I think that's what's going to be, they're trying to figure out, is it's almost like a double-edged sword. The better they make their search engine, like the less time you're going to spend on it, which means the less time they're going to have to show you ads, and which is like their primary business model. But so yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how this adapts over time. I definitely think the chat GPT threat has kind of faded a little bit. People realize that maybe it's not the best way to do like Google type searches. Yeah. It's definitely good for ideation, improving things you already have, but it's not the best for asking like questions that you want accurate answers for.
Yeah, actually, and I was going to ask you about this too because, and I totally agree with you. I think especially seeing Google come out with their AGI or whatever it is, like in their search results, there's a lot of things that it's not really helpful for that I end up still going to the results for. And I think there is something about the traditional way of search that, whether it's because we're so used to it now that we prefer it, or for whatever reason, maybe the people still don't trust AI as much. I definitely think that it seems, as it's been released, it definitely seems a bit less threatening in that way. But actually, I forgot what I was going to ask. But yeah, I definitely think that you are. Oh, this is yeah. In terms of like, and I don't know if this is something that you've thought about, but I know that with the introduction of ChatGPT and Google coming out with the AI, with their search AI, it seems like a lot of people are trying to build their own internal ecosystem. Like now, I think brands are going to become much more. People are going to be boosting their brands a lot because rather than saying like, "Oh, we got a lot of our traffic through Google search," if that's going away, you'd likely want people to be like, hey, I actually go like the same thing with Wirecutter. Like a lot of times people will just look up a certain term and then Wirecutter. Like Wirecutter is developing an ecosystem to where people just end up going to them. They don't necessarily rely on Google. They get a lot of people directly to them. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in terms of like now with the introduction of AI, people are going to definitely try to build their own sort of like internal ecosystems to sort of keep people there. Rather than searching through Google, people might search internally or just go directly to the website.
Yeah. And I think this brings a broader point that I think will start to change how people, I just think the way people consume content is going to dramatically change over the next like 20, 30 years. I think that the normal way, like you're saying about searching or maybe landing on these large publisher websites, I think brand affiliation will probably get stronger, like you said. I even noticed it myself where I just know what site I want to go to and I just go there for certain information. I think the way that people discover, and this is one of the things we're going to talk about, so this is a perfect segue. Really like the difference between organic and social now, or like social organic. I think that a lot of people are going to discover websites or products or brands just through different mediums other than Google now. I think that the way that we've been consuming content has been trending toward just more social media in general. And I just think that a lot of people say, oh, like whatever, people are so against the algorithm, they don't want to spend time on these apps. But I mean, do you think there's going to be less or more people on social media 5 years from now? The answer is probably more.
Yeah, definitely more for sure. Because even with YouTube, I mean, I know Mr. Beast has talked about it as well, but I think like 10 years ago, there were significantly less people outside of like maybe the developing sort of countries that there weren't that many people on YouTube and on social media. And as maybe other tech has become cheaper or whatever it is, like, there's even look at T-Series, I think is the YouTube channel that, I know at one point PewDiePie was like sort of competing with to get to 100 million. It's like, it's a totally India-based YouTube channel and probably has mainly subscribers from that country. And it has 100, now it's like 150 million or some 130 million subscribers. And that's primarily in India. And I don't think that was necessarily those users were there 10 years ago. So I think as time goes on, more of the world is going to hop on it. And I think social media is everything on the internet is likely going to benefit from that, including social media. So.
Yep. Yeah. And I just think the way that you can just see, YouTube is a prime example because everyone, 5 years ago was like, oh, YouTube's saturated, don't start a YouTube channel. But like to this day, I mean, there's still just more people consuming. And we were like part of the generation that, first was on YouTube. It kind of came out when we were kids. If you think about it now, like every generation of kids after us is going to wind up on YouTube probably at a higher rate than we were because, again, we were kind of the first people to test it out. And even just the way that X, or formerly Twitter, like you can now, it has a better article reading experience. I just think there's going to be more diverse ways that people get to websites and consume like website type content other than just through like organic search. I don't think it's going anywhere. but I definitely think that organic search or social media like growth for websites will probably play a larger role going forward, just because people are spending more time on the platform. Like for a search engine, you don't really spend any more time than you need to, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going for an answer, then you wind up on the website and then you spend time there. But social media, like you go there just to spend time and then you wind up at different places. And so I think
That's a
as
good point.
people spend more time and the apps create better ways to consume content and off ramp or on ramp, I know that like a lot of social media algorithms don't really like external links, but um, I definitely think it's a place that will probably drive a lot more growth for websites.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I don't know where I heard it, but somebody was saying like I think a lot of times whenever something new is introduced, people think that whatever else is going on right now or whatever things people are using are going to become obsolete. And I think in certain cases that's true. But I think in terms of like online, I think there's going to be a point in time where, down the road where social media is going to play a role for very particular things, whether it's for, how a lot of people like TikTok sees a huge surge in like, best food places in this place. Like people are becoming less reliant on Google for that, and TikTok and Instagram Reels, and Instagram have a much better environment for those types of videos. So I just think that things are going like Google's still going to be necessary for certain things. Like there's so many different things that Google provides in terms of like information and the formatting and stuff like that that wouldn't really be appropriate on TikTok and vice versa. So I just think that the market share might even out a little bit to where people go for social media for X, Y, and Z, but they go to Google for this and maybe they use AI for this. Like I don't necessarily think one is going to become obsolete. I think Google might lose some market share, or search engines will learn market share as things become a little bit more like as environments get better for certain things. But I just thought it was interesting how I think there's going to be somewhat of a little of a change, but I don't think anything necessarily will become obsolete.
Yeah. And going back to your point about YouTube and that India focused channel, I think that's another area that maybe we had a bit of like an echo chamber in the US and maybe like Europe specifically also about like audiences, because I think again, TikTok, that was huge in the US and in China and probably Europe. But like with the release of Threads, which is Instagram's competitor to Twitter, they released it in the US and India first. And like there's been a whole new, audience of people from India specifically that I'm seeing like interacting with content and building new brands of people who were never on any other platforms that I saw before. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue. Like there's only 330 million people in the US. Like there's billions of people across the world that haven't really lived their social media life yet in terms of like having access and onboarding onto the internet like at scale. And I think as more countries, develop, get that infrastructure and people hop online, there's just going to be new dynamics, new groups of people that previously weren't there. And so, all of us having this bias of we've been through YouTube, we've been through TikTok, we've been through Twitter, we have been here for years, and there are some countries that aren't even there yet. And I think that that's going to shift the landscape a lot because we're entrenched in a lot of beliefs on what the best social media practices are or the best way to grow on social media. But, there are entire countries of people who are still, in the very early phases of getting access to this tech. And I think that that's going to change a lot of the way that things occur in the next, 10 years maybe.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like the evolution, and I guess maybe that's what I was trying to think about before, but I couldn't get the words for it. Is like, yeah, as more as the infrastructure for like internet goes to a lot of places that didn't necessarily have it before, it's essentially their introduction to what we were introduced, and they're kind of going to go through the same things there, the same sort of evolutions of it maybe as we did, but maybe in different ways. But yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah. So I would love to hear more about your experience on YouTube. Obviously, I know you grew a couple gaming channels. I know more recently you're trying some different types of content on YouTube. Would kind of love to hear about your just experience with that, growing there, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I guess to give a little bit of context, the first YouTube, well, I guess the first real serious YouTube channel that I made where I started to actually make very consistent videos on, I made my first few in like April of 2012, but I wasn't really consistent with those because I couldn't really find like certain topics or certain things to make recurring videos about. But then I made a gaming YouTube channel, and it was kind of focused on Minecraft specifically. And the one thing, so I was like creating different videos, like I was kind of recreating videos that had already been made, and a lot of those were like different, like automatic farm builds or like, you know, automatic this, automatic that. So I think like my first 10 videos were kind of just like me mimicking what a lot of like top videos did, and they got like no views whatsoever. So at that point in time, one of the servers that I used to play on used to have like it was like a huge server, but they used to have, I think it was like weekly or it might have been daily challenges where they would like hide a care package somewhere on this like huge map, and multiple people can get it. It's just in a specific location, and so I realized that like because and not everyone, whenever I would search it up, I would look like, you know, like September 8th, and this was back in 2012, like September 8th, whatever server it was, care package location. And a bunch of other ones from the previous days would pop up, but nobody had made a video on the one like that day. And there would be a lot of gaps, you know, in certain days where somebody made one on like the 1st and 2nd of September for those care packages, but not like the 3rd and the 4th. And it just seemed like I knew that there was enough demand. Maybe it was even like 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 people or whatever looking up daily. And clearly the demand isn't being met. So if I could hop on really early, just record a video of me showing where the location is, I could start to get like very easy views because I know people are looking for this. And so that's how I originally started, was just doing those things, and people would end up coming to the YouTube channel. And there'd be some days where the really big YouTubers would, or the larger YouTubers would make videos on this specific thing. And there'd be some days where they wouldn't. And on the days where they wouldn't, that's when I would get like the most views and it would gain the most subscribers. And then once I had, you know, maybe like 100 or 150 subscribers is when I started to make, in addition to that content, just other kind of random content about the server and like about Minecraft. And like it became much easier once I had an audience to build out those other pieces of content. And so that's how my strategy was when I was making like other YouTube channels, was like figure out things that maybe are recurring, that are in demand, where the demand isn't being met, and make YouTube videos about that. And it's much easier said than done.
Yeah. You know, something I've noticed between you talking about growing on YouTube and SEO in general, it seems that you're very good at finding opportunities, you know, where demand isn't being met and then capitalizing that. Can you kind of flesh out your process about how you find these trends or these content opportunities, and then how you know you have an opportunity to go for versus maybe an opportunity that's not going to be as successful?
Yeah. So I definitely think that maybe that like lens that I look through was definitely inspired or definitely created because of that YouTube channel that I had made. And so because I've tried to utilize that in like other YouTube channels that I've made and websites that I've made, I think generally speaking, the method is, or the way that I even go about it now, is I really try to think about like what I don't like to, I guess sort of a tangent very quickly. It's like, I don't think I would be making good content, or don't think that the type of content that somebody like Mr. Beast makes, I don't think is something that I would be able, I don't think it would be tough for me to get on board with content like that if I was just starting a YouTube channel, because that is very much like, people aren't necessarily looking for, I think one of his most recent videos was putting a Lamborghini in a giant shredder. Like I would have to do some research, but I can almost say for a fact that I don't think many people per month are looking up Lamborghini in a shredder. Like, yeah. And so for me, granted, yes, it's super like entertaining, I think, and that's much more push. Like I definitely think there's a lot more push there. Whereas like, I think I look for content or whatever that might be more of like a little bit of like a pull, like users are like trying to look for this information, and so I'll make it. So I guess that sort of little mention there is like, I don't think I would be good at making content that people aren't searching for. And so then that kind of leads into the method, as I was saying, that I normally use. And so like, I guess thinking about how I normally go about finding content that maybe people are looking for, finding those opportunities, a lot of it is just like trying to just brainstorm on different industries. A lot of times I'll go, what I'll normally do is I will use like Ahrefs or SEMrush one of the like SEO tools, and I'll just go on Reddit, and I'll just anything that I can possibly think of, like, r/woodworking, r/ like all these different things I'll try to look up, and then I'll try to see what they're ranking first, second, third for. And this is I guess mainly for I still use, this is how I use it for websites. But I guess just like exposing, I think Reddit is a really great website to expose yourself to different like things that people are interested in. And yes, there are different things like hobbies and this and that, but there's also a lot of things that people will go to for like recurring information. And so I think if you're able to figure out, and so that's essentially, I'll just end up I'll go to Reddit and I'll see what people are searching up. And you can even search up things like if you have a tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush, and you go to Reddit, like just type in like yesterday's date or like today's date or a few days ago's date. Because a lot of time people, whenever they're searching something they're looking for that is like a recurring thing, they'll search for that keyword and then like the date. And you can get a really good idea as to what people are looking for on like a daily or weekly basis by doing that. So that's how I do it with a lot of times with the websites, is just like take a look at what forums are ranking for really well for, and you could probably get a good idea as to like, hey, it looks like Reddit ranks really well for this, this, and this. I could probably make a website that goes more into depth than a Reddit article does. But with YouTube specifically, I guess you can use a lot of like YouTube search filters to help. What I used to do to try to figure out what people were like looking for, if you go into YouTube and you type in like the date, you can just filter for videos that had that like in the title. And you can filter for like the past 4 hours, so you can kind of see what people are uploading. And I think a lot of times what I've found, like there's daily like Roblox codes that get released, and there's different things that people look for on a daily basis. So I don't know if it's really making sense here, but I think if you're just able to figure out things that people need on a recurring basis that you think that you can create recurring content about, I think that's how I typically find them. But it's just a lot of searching and a lot of searching and a lot of searching. So
yeah, I think that's a great point. Looking for what people are searching for, that's definitely like an SEO kind of approach to it. And I think that's important because when people are making content, I think they always, and same thing with building products, honestly. Like now that I work in product management, you see it is you might think you want to build a certain feature or create a certain piece of content, but unless people actually want it, there's not really a reason to build it. A lot of people will like go through the lens of, I think this is a good idea, so other people must. But in reality, like we do have tools to kind of get at what people are really looking for. To your point about Reddit, for anyone listening, again, this is definitely a huge tip. I've been seeing a ton of stuff about Reddit strategies. One way, and I don't know if you've stumbled across this, one that I've been using that's been amazing is subreddit stats, which basically gives you like a breakdown of, /r for whatever topic it is. And it can show you how fast a subreddit is growing. And the reason that's valuable, at least the way that I think it's valuable, is like I think Reddit is the place where the first movers are. So like when something first gets created, like a really new topic, for example, when crypto first came out or when AI was like really starting to become popular, the first places that people go and the first communities that get built up like almost overnight are Reddit. Like someone will go make the subreddit and then, it has 1,000 people who are following it and posting in it. So if you want to see where like mainstream adoption or mainstream like interest might start popping up, Reddit is a great place to go for. And I've also seen it being used to grow like newsletters and things like that. So I definitely think if you're not using Reddit, use it. They're not sponsoring this, but Reddit, if you want to sponsor me, reach out. But yeah, it's definitely a great place to do some like preliminary research on some topic opportunities for sure.
I think that's really well said, actually, Matt. Like how a lot of times things that are in its like topics or interests that are in their infancy generally end up somewhere on forums, and a lot of times it's Reddit. And I guess a piece with that too is like very new things end up doing like ranking really well on Reddit. And I think if things aren't necessarily new, but Reddit is doing really well, it just happens to be topics that don't really seem of interest to any other major like websites. Or so I think those are the two things. Like if you see a subreddit ranking, or if you see like a forum post ranking really well in Google, it's either because the topic is probably quite new and there hasn't been really any maybe established websites or other websites that are writing about it. So Reddit ends up ranking, or the fact that nobody is really paid. People didn't think it was as necessary to write something about this particular topic. And so Reddit ends up ranking. So I think it's those two things, but I think that's really well said in terms of things, especially in their infancy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, again, like the thing that I just see a lot of people struggle with is like testing ideas, and really getting at what content people want to consume. And Reddit is just a place where there's so many users already that it just makes it easy to iterate on what people are looking for and seeing what's really popular. But yeah, so I definitely think Reddit is a great place to test those strategies, and great way that you use it and a way that you look to spot trends. So I would love to kind of, obviously throughout this episode, we've heard a lot about like your different sites, your YouTube channels. Would like to hear more on the personal side of how, you manage that with regular work. Like how did you get these side projects going? Like what sparked your interest for them? And, do you see these as being something you want to continue pursuing? Do you want them to just go hand in hand with your professional work? Or do you want this to eventually really be like what your life's work is all about?
Yeah. So I guess just to briefly answer maybe the initial thing, like I got interested in doing, like YouTube was always an interest of mine. And like you said, we kind of grew up on it. And ever since I created my YouTube channel, like I think it was like going into freshman year of high school, like that was like my entire life. Like there was a point in time where I really wanted to be like a full-time YouTuber, especially once I got partnered, the YouTube channel got partnered and I started earning money like 15 years old in high school. Like it is really addicting. And so I think that was like the spark for my like enjoyment for like content creation. But in terms of like what I do now, and I still do YouTube, and there's like 2 or 3 YouTube channels. We do a lot of like YouTube Shorts now, because I think YouTube Shorts is like a really good way to get very quick exposure. Like I think if you're starting a YouTube channel nowadays, definitely start with Shorts. Try to post whatever content you want to create. Try to figure out if there's a way to make content as like Shorts. And it's really easy to get views and subscribers that way just because of the nature of YouTube Shorts. And then you can start to create long form content once you have people subscribe to the channel. So that's that. But in terms of the websites and the stuff that I'm probably mainly focused on now, I got interested in it at the first company that I worked for. The company was like a personal finance website startup. And pretty much everyone there had different side hustles. A lot of people had Shopify stores. Mm-hmm. Some people had, social media accounts that they ran, like unaffiliated with the thing. And some people had websites, and I really liked the website stuff. So that was my like initial interest. And at the beginning, I think it was very much just like, oh, this would be really cool. It's like a resume builder. Like that was kind of the purpose behind it originally. And then as I got into it, and I learned a lot more about like how to make high quality content, how you can scale high quality content, and this and that. It's very much developed into something that I enjoy doing on the side, not necessarily even for like a resume builder, but much more because it is, I think, something to keep me busy. It's something that is, I think, really cool to have like side income from. Like I think that that's like a huge portion of it, and websites are technically like assets, so you can sell them for like a large chunk of money, depending on how much they're earning on a week or on a monthly basis. So to me, it's become much more now. And in terms of like how I pair it with work, I really do enjoy work, and I enjoy doing the side stuff because I think they complement each other pretty well. There's a lot of stuff that I learned at work that I've applied to the websites that I work on, and vice versa. And I think that I've really enjoyed having that balance and that structure there. I don't know if there ever be a time, like maybe down the road, there could be a time where I want to do like websites full time. But I think for now, a lot of it is like, for me, a lot of it is just like enjoyment of like the duality of the two. The nature, generally speaking, they're very similar, but the nature of the things that I work on versus the things at work are different. And so I'm getting exposed to sort of two different sides of things that can kind of help. They can kind of help one another. So, that's kind of it. And in terms of like balance of managing the side projects versus managing work, there was at a few points when I was like really kind of getting on the stages of trying to grow the sites exponentially, where it's really hard for me to, every time I was working on work stuff, I was thinking about like, oh, I could do this and this for the websites. And every time I was doing stuff on the websites, I was like, oh, this and this would be good for work. So what I really had to do, I think, was dedicate certain time of the day to just focus on tackling everything that I needed to tackle before like deadlines, sending out everything that I needed to send. And if at a certain time in the day or a certain time of the week that all those things were done, then I can go and work on the websites that I have. And that kind of helped because I think I was getting distracted when I was working on one and I was getting distracted when I was working on the other. And I think that balance, when you really enjoy something like that, you want to be working on them simultaneously. And it's like, it's a little bit hard to do that when you're trying to jump back and forth.
Yeah. I think you brought up a great point earlier there about like you got started on some of this for resume building. And I definitely think this is something the audience can take away from, especially if you're someone, maybe in college or later stages of high school, and thinking about maybe what you want to do. If you want to go into like any creative field or something that's a little bit more softer skill, like just business in general. Obviously, I'm not talking to people who want to be like doctors, lawyers, engineers. It's a little different, but you can really build like your own work experience and land jobs or land opportunities or really gain a lot of experience through that. I mean, I got my position at Forbes through personal sites that I made in SEO. I never took marketing. I never learned SEO like officially in my education. I mean, I took certifications online afterward to kind of solidify that I had the skill, but I pretty much solely got that position based on sites that I had ran and the experience of doing all of that on my own. So, if you're ever doubting about that, you can, from Alex and I, both of us have done it, and it's 100% a viable path now. And I think, a lot of people might not realize that. So it can definitely be done. And at the worst, if it doesn't work, like you gain some kind of experience or learn something new from it. So I definitely think that's something valuable to take away from what Alex just said there.
Yeah, and just on top of that as well, like I think as you mentioned, obviously, not every field of work is can be you can get introduced into like a particular field of work by doing something on your own, like you're saying, like doctors, lawyers, and like there's definitely things that it's not as viable on. But I even know that there's people who graduated with degrees in like nursing and other things, and they ended up, I guess they worked in that field for a little bit, but they ended up growing like social media accounts or like different accounts that they then were able to basically use as an introduction into that field, and ended up getting jobs because they ran very successful social media accounts. The same thing with people who one of the guys who I worked with at my first job, he had a Shopify store that he ran ads on like Facebook and Google for. He did a lot of like paid search things just on his own, and he was studying engineering. And he was our paid search guy and paid social guy. And so it was really interesting because he didn't have, the only experience that he had wasn't from like school or anything. It was like very much just from real world experience. So if anyone is looking at like a field where it's like, oh, you can start something on your own, like you don't necessarily need to go through schooling to do it, give it a shot if you're interested in it, because I think that, like you said, the worst thing that happens is like you learn a few things.
Yeah. I think that also raises a good point, is that like a lot of people think, oh, we're too late to start this channel, or we're too late to grow on social media. One, as we kind of talked about before, there's going to be more people 5 years from now than there are today. So there is opportunity. Yeah. But also, like, if you end up growing a social following, that's something you can carry with you and monetize and take and learn experience from. It's not learning these types of skills that are profitable on the internet. Like, the internet's not going anywhere. We're probably going to be spending more time on it. The people in need, businesses in need of people who understand the internet and the new ways that it works, like, that's not going to go out of style. So I definitely think it's important, no matter what you do, to kind of have an understanding of it, because it is part of the real business side of things. And I just think it's valuable to learn in general.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. I would like to kind of open it up, talking a little bit more about kind of your approach to growing in general, whether it's professionally, your side sites, however you want to approach that, but just how you handle, becoming better at what you're doing day after day, year after year. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah. So I don't know if maybe this is going to answer it fully, but in terms of like improving whatever I'm working on, to me, like the way I measure like improvement is maybe more of an efficiency thing. I think that if for me with the blogging that I do, I created two pretty successful websites in terms of the ranking of the majority of the articles that I was writing. They were ranking very well. And I at that point in time when I had those two websites, I understood like, hey, I know what it takes to have a good website. So to me, how do I improve? How do I expand upon like this experience? Like if I feel like I have uh, this formula or this very deep understanding of how to rank well in Google. But it took me like a year and a half to build these websites. Like, what would be considered to me like an expansion of that scale or an expansion of these things? And I think to me, it becomes just becoming more efficient at it. Like, I think I know how to create high quality articles. So how can I make them at scale? And so that's how I've measured a lot of the success for these things. So I think if if you have that way of thinking as well of like becoming more efficient at something or trying to do it at scale, I think something that I've always looked to do and that I've looked to do is and especially nowadays it's quite easy to do, is if you're in a field where you can automate a lot of things and free up your time to work on other things, or to free up your time just to work on the same things with just a different project. I think that's a huge thing that I look for in terms of like expanding these projects, or yeah, in terms of expanding them. And as I mentioned, like one of the ways that I sort of attempted to do this was working with someone to create like the automatic publishing tool, the automatic like WordPress publishing tool, where I had that same database of like information that I created for the grocery site, and with a few little tweaks was pretty much able to get a bunch of fully written articles with tables of information in like certain rows in Excel. And at that point, once I had become more efficient at creating high quality content, I needed something to become more efficient at publishing that content, because publishing it is pretty manual. And so that next step for me was getting a tool that automated it. And now, after like a few months of back and forth, have a tool that automatically publishes content from an Excel spreadsheet. So I think if you're able to look at the different things that you work on in a day, that whether it's like with actual work or with side projects, try to figure out the different efficiencies that you can create. Because I think, to me, an ultimate sign of success, I guess, or an ultimate sign that you're of doing well, is that you're able to work on whatever you can work on, but you have a lot, you're free, you have a lot of like free time. So if you take a look a year ago and you're like, I was spending X amount of time creating X amount of content, X amount of high quality content, and you could look, now that where you are now, you're able to do that much quicker. You have a lot more free time to work on other things. I just think that you kind of have it, at least in those terms, you figured something out to where you can do that. So answer to the whole sort of question there is, I think a huge measurement of like development for me is efficiency.
Yeah, I like that. That's actually an interesting one. I haven't gotten that response before. So you're basically saying a way you measure is if a year ago it took you like a year and a half to build a website and get it to a certain monthly search volume, but now you can do it in 9 months. Like those 6 months of difference is progress. And I think that's kind of, I mean, I definitely look at life that way. I'm always like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. That's kind of how I approach things, is like there has to be a better way. But that sometimes gets a little toxic with like just always thinking there's a faster way. Sometimes you do just need to spend the time on certain things.
Yeah.
But I think that's also just innate in technology, is everything just gets faster over time, and it allows you to spend more time on the things that are inherently hard and inherently unique as people. Like I think people were really scared about AI because they're like, oh, it's going to take X amount of jobs, but it might take X amount of jobs, but it's probably going to take X amount of jobs that we didn't really need people doing it. And now that that's being taken care of by a computer, now we can have people focus on more advanced things, more strategy, more high level, rather than just punching in a couple things into an Excel database.
That kind of reminds me as well. Maybe this is a bit unrelated, but I meant to mention it before, but it kind of reminds me of that. Before Google had like those snippets. Like if you look up on Google right now, like what time is it in England, it'll give you the time. Like what time is it in in Italy. Like it'll give you those times. Like you don't even have to click into anything. But there was a point in time where people had dedicated websites to just time zones. Like people had, it would be like timezone.com or like timezonesaroundtheworld.com. And people had websites that would just focus on those things. And then at a certain point, Google was like, hey, we can actually just do this on like our, just in our, on our interface. Like people don't have to click into anything. And those websites became obsolete. And now when we look back to it, I'm sure at the time they were like, oh, Google has a thing now, it's going to tank our traffic. And it probably did. Like it probably did tank their traffic. But with that being said, it also begs the question, like, at a certain point, like, yeah, this, was it fully necessary that there were websites dedicated to that? If anything, it's making people's lives easier in certain ways. So this doesn't apply. Obviously, this statement doesn't apply to everything that AI has to do with, but in terms of like things that I've seen, and maybe that philosophy only carries true to some things, but in a certain way, if the work that you're doing is getting replaced, it's probably making making things more efficient, or for whatever reason, like maybe at a certain point that manual stuff you're doing isn't necessary any longer. But that was just kind of the example it made me think of.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good point, because I think that if you just like look back over, let's say the modern like internet, so like going back to, maybe the mid 2000s, whatever, like people tend to like freak out over these narratives about whatever, whether it's, the economy crashing or AI is going to take over or whatever. And then I think they just these things have a way of working out. And yes, like it might seem scary, but at the end of the day, you look back at what we were worried about, like maybe let's say 10 years ago about the internet, social media, whatever. Like, yeah, there are some negatives, but I would argue there's been a whole lot positive too out of all these things that people were afraid of. And I think with AI, it's a little bit of a different case, just because we understand that it is like a type of technology that we're developing and we don't fully realize the capabilities it'll have yet. And there are some like ethical concerns around it, which again, need to be in place. But, I think all in all, these things tend to kind of work themselves out, and people tend to be better off than they were before. So that's just kind of my outlook on it. But I tend to be a bit of an optimist about that stuff. But yeah, let's see. Well, this has been a great conversation. Wanted to open it up to you. Any questions, anything you want to touch on that we haven't touched on yet, or anything you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, no, this has actually been great. There's a lot of times I think where I'd love to like chat to someone, and I mean, I think have been the only person where I've actually chatted in detail about things, and you actually like engage, like you have very similar thoughts and you provide certain things. So this has been really great for me, because I think there's been so many things that I just like to talk through, and I don't know, hopefully people are interested in certain things, but yeah, no like other further things, but I don't know. I'm curious to see down for me at least, and maybe this is a good question for you to leave everyone off on, but in terms of like different aspirations that you have pursuing things down the road, my plans at least, like I said, I have some plans to, I'm developing more websites that I would really love to test things out on, but ultimately I'd just love to like liquidate a lot of the portfolio at the end of next year. And I think to me, that's really cool, being able to turn something that you've done into, maybe this, I don't know if this is a bit superficial, but like being able to like really fully monetize certain things that you've worked on. It'd be really cool to be like, to put a down payment on a house with just the money you've earned from, websites. I think that is cool because it feels more realized that way. But for me, yeah, a lot of my goals down the road in developing my skills are just keep developing websites. And I'm having a try at a bunch of YouTube shorts, and they've been going kind of well. But I want to make sure that I'm not getting too comfortable in a particular place. So I think every year or so, once I can automate certain things and free up my time, is to just immediately replace that time with something that I may not be as good at. So that's kind of my outlook going forward, but I'm curious to hear what your plans are regarding maybe even like this podcast or other things, how you plan on spending the next year or two working on this.
Yeah, and I like that replacing the time you saved with something you're not good at. I think that's really smart, and also just you're probably never going to regret doing that, which is a way that I look at a lot of things. And Alex Hormozy has like a saying about this. It's like, when you're trying to make a decision or decide how to proceed, like do something that would make your 8-year-old self and your 80-year-old self proud. which I think is a cool way to look at it. Like it's, don't take the safe route in terms of being like an 80-year-old. Like you would probably regret always taking the safe route, but then also, don't be afraid to aim too high for your 8-year-old self. But that's just a sidebar. In terms of like what I'm thinking, I mean, I do this like podcast and the other media stuff that I do for two reasons. One, I think it's just really cool. It will be really cool like 20 years from now to look back on it. Especially if it's something that I do for years on end. It'll be really cool to just have a library of all these conversations and all these thoughts just for forever, which is like unique to our time. This didn't exist, 30 years ago. So I think it's really cool to be able to do that. And secondly, I just want to grow like an online presence and audience. I think that the future of a lot of like the internet will be in communities. Which has a little bit to do with like, my Web3 crypto like ideology, but also just I think the internet is moving toward like these micro communities where people share interests. I think like things are getting very distributed. People are preferring to go to podcasts and people for information instead of going to like news sources. A lot of times I think that's kind of getting distributed a little bit. So like for me, I'm just focusing on really trying to build up a community online of people who like to think the same way. I mean, I'm always committed to, growing every day, every year. I think it's important and I think it makes life worthwhile. I know this is getting a little deep, but it is kind of why I've started all of this. But yeah, so I mean, for me, obviously I would love to monetize at some point. The big thing that I'm working on, like behind the scenes, this podcast is like the most front facing thing I have, but the big thing I'm working on, and I mentioned it to you a bit, Alex, is like it's called MindShift Now. It's a Substack right now. It will have its own podcast eventually, but it's really, I spent a good chunk of my life working on like habit change and like mindset, psychology, between like talking to psychiatrists, therapists, like all these different like field experts. I've learned a lot about how to like really train your mind, change how you think, and just be a better version of yourself. And with that, I have a couple ideas of how to monetize through that type of like community. But for me, it's really just about building community, having this content to look back on, and hopefully, inspiring some people along the way. That's kind of what my real vision has been.
That's great. I have one. I know that was. I have one sort of added question onto that with your mention of community, and maybe this ties back to a few things we talked about. But I think similar to the field that you're in and the field that I'm in, one of the things that got me really inspired to get into it was a lot of the YouTube videos and stuff that I would watch would be after following these people who had websites for a while. A lot of them would be like, yeah, I have a daytime job. Like some guy was a manager at a grocery store. Another guy, this dude, Leon Angus, he's from like England. He's a train conductor, but he runs like websites on the side. And similar to like your community and building community, I think what's really cool, maybe it's something that I just wanted to mention is like, yes, I know both of us have still work in SEO and we do the website things, but I think the vast majority of people that get involved in creating content that is not their primary like function in life. They have so many other things, and I think that was one of the most inviting things. But in terms of your mention of community, I think what's really cool is that like as you build your community, you're probably going to meet such a vast, such a different variety of people, because there's so many people that like, oh, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, somebody might be a truck driver, but they're interested in what you're doing, or they have that same thing. And I think that's what's really cool about what you mentioned that kind of sparked my interest of like, yeah, that's right. Part of the reason why I got into this because it seems so unintimidating because of the fact that it's just like anyone can really do it.
Yeah. I think that's what also like makes content creation unique. And for anyone like who's looking to start, is most of these people actually do things with their day, like, and that's why they have the content, or that's why they can create the content. It's like you're drawing upon real experience, which is why it's hard to just create content to create content. You really should be creating content, at least if you're trying to do like a personal brand, you should be creating content that centers around like your interests, because if you're interested in it, chances are other people are interested in it as well. But it is really cool. The internet has allowed this whole like evolution of people who have a 9 to 5, but then they also are able to grow and monetize their own, passions. And it's not like I think it gets, sometimes it gets a negative connotation, especially on like Twitter. People will like hate on other people like charging for content or trying to make money off content. But it's like, in reality, there are people who are willing to pay for certain aspects or certain access to things because they think it's really cool and to them it's worth it. And I think as long as the time you're investing is creating quality output, like there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that people are drawn to communities, and I think that maybe with the way we started with social media, we're testing it, right? Like social media, I think, is like a live social experiment. Like it feels like it's been around for a long time because it's like half our lives, but to our parents, it's only been like the last 10 years. You know what I mean? So I think it's going to evolve a lot. I think the real, like, the best version outcome of social media is like communities rather than just like a feed of posts that you scroll through. I think that's kind of where things are going. I could be wrong, but yeah, I mean, I think if you just look at Reddit, Discord, like these places where communities are kind of primarily built, and the success that they have, and like, there are some diehard, if you don't know, like there are diehard Reddit people. Like anyone who's into gaming or like tech who has tried to figure something out. Like Reddit is the place you wind up where your question like Google can't even answer it. Like it's so specific that like only someone else on Reddit has been able to answer it.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool, and it serves a great purpose. But I know that was kind of a very convoluted answer to your question, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you, and maybe one follow-up question as well.
Yeah.
In terms of getting interested, if you wanted to create content and charge for that content, some advice that I first heard when I was first getting into the blogging space was like, because when I was like, what do I want to write about? I'm not an expert in like anything. Like I feel like I don't know, I don't have a particular knowledge of like X, Y, or Z. Even if it's something, what I realized is that in terms of creating like a website, just find what you're interested in learning about, and kind of have your website be like the journey of what you're learning or like the questions you might have along the way. Like it's totally fine like my first website was a golf website, and like I play golf and like I do it somewhat regularly, but I'm by no means an expert, and I had no clue about any of the rules, any of this, any of that. So part of why I wanted to write golf content was to learn more. So I was learning as I was writing, right? And I think that general interest that you have as like a beginner, especially, really feeds into well-researched articles. So to your point, even if people who want to get into it, like you don't necessarily be an expert, as long as you're interested, genuinely interested in something, I think you can create really good content around it, whether it's, a newsletter, whether it's a website or social media account. Like as long as you have the interest, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a good point, because I think a lot of people, get afraid to post online because of exactly what you just said. They feel they don't have the authority. And I think there's two ways to approach this. And I actually learned this in a writing class in college, which is funny because it's one of the few things that I use almost on a daily basis in terms of like a learning from college. And it's this idea of like, there's two types of authority. There's proximate, meaning like you're just close to the issue, i.e. like you actually have the experience, like your proximity to the problem or your proximity to whatever you're writing about. But then there's like a different type of authority where it's like you're just referring to experts who have the authority, which is more of the route of what you're talking about, which is like learning about things and just sharing those learnings, which I think, put a different way and like more digestible for the audience, is like you could take two approaches. One of them that's really popular on Twitter that I learned from these writers, Nicholas Cole and Dickie Bush, is they call it like the 2-year rule. Basically, just let's say you know something or something you're interested in, just write about it as if it was you 2 years ago before you had those 2 years of knowledge. So for example, for you, it would be SEO. Like you could just write about the learnings that you have over the last 2 years for someone who's maybe 2 years behind you, which is a good framing. And then the other one is just what you were referring to, which is documenting. Like just document your learning experience. You're doing the research. You're not an expert in it, but you're doing the research that maybe someone else hasn't done. You just synthesizing a book can be really useful. Synthesizing an article, synthesizing a bunch of different sources, and then repackaging that, for people, that's valuable. So I think, and my other advice here would be just don't write about something that if you're going to write about it and you're afraid, just don't write about something that you haven't done, right? Like, or if you're documenting something, write about it as through the lens of you're documenting it. You know, don't try to act like you've sold $1 million worth of something if you haven't, which I think is like obviously what people are afraid of looking like. So just realizing that, you know, just draw on your real experience and your content will sound high quality off the bat. You won't have to like really work on that much. But that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, no, very well said. Very well said.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex. We're definitely going to have a follow-up conversation, but I really appreciate your time.
No, yeah. Thanks for having me. This is, I feel like I've been able to debrief so many different thoughts going on. So it's great talking to you too.
Yeah. Thank you to you who made it to the end of the episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to this on. And if the episode helped you at all, feel free to share it with a friend. It really helps us grow organically and reach more people. Follow us on all social media as well. They're all linked in the description, and I'm pretty active on those daily. Check out our newsletter in the description, MindShift. MindShift is a new platform to help us think better. If you are someone who is interested in growing your mindset, learning new techniques, creating unique ideas, and want to excel in your given field, I highly recommend you check it out. It's free after all. That's it for today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next pod.